No. Test 1, 2. Test. Hey, Shamani, how are you? They're not recording it yet. I hope they're not. You gotta tell me when you start now, when we're ready. You're all set. Okay. I'd like to thank each one of you for taking your time to come out and hear Dr. John Anderson. He's with us today from the University of West Georgia, and he'll be presenting as our Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs. We've had a good long day of meetings, and so as he wraps this up with his presentation following, we'll be seeing Dr. Blake. So at this time, what we'll do is run this pretty much as we've done the others. He'll go about 20 or 25 minutes with his presentation, and then there'll be a time that you can ask questions of him, and then also he can ask questions of you in terms of that. So a good interaction back and forth. So this time, Dr. John Anderson, will you come and give your presentation?
Troy. Well, it's good to be with you today. I appreciate you taking time to be here. I know there's a lot of other places you could be, and this is candidate number 3, and you're probably burned out. But I appreciate you coming. I want to start by just talking a little bit about why you're here and why I'm here. What is it about you that brought you to a university setting? Why is it you wanted to work in a university setting? I think for a lot of us, if we think back to those reasons and we were choosing what career we'd go into, some of us entered education later in life after a career somewhere else. Some of us entered high school or college and really came to a university to make a difference in the lives of students so that their lives would be a little brighter, their future would be a little more hopeful, and we could do something to help them out. Sometimes in a university, that hope we have and those initial intentions we have of making that difference in the lives of students can become overcrowded or pushed aside because we get caught up in bureaucracy, red tape, not being able to get things done, burned out. Has anybody had that feeling before once, maybe twice? Conversation is about what we're here about today, and that is trying to figure out the future of the administration of Middle Georgia to see if we can find a way that those things that have come in between us and the fulfilling career that we wanted in higher education can be removed so we can be a little better at accomplishing what we had, so we can return again, so we can return again to our reasons for being here. I firmly believe that if an administration within a university is run effectively, no university is going to run it perfectly. But if it's run effectively, we can reconnect with those original reasons we came. And we can spend the majority of our efforts helping students prepare to live better lives and more fulfilling lives, and less worrying about what's next and worrying about any instability in leadership. So today I want to talk you through how that process operates from my perspective, and I hope you get a good understanding of what it would be like for you and I to work together. Then we get a chance to talk through some questions and answers. So let's next look at the state of higher education. We have assumed for a long time in higher education that if we keep doing the same things we've always done, we'll always get the same results we've always received, right? You know that definition or that statement that's attributed to Albert Einstein, that insanity is to achieve different results by doing the same things, right? Well, the current state of higher education, this statement is, we can't continue to do the same things and get the same results. The competitive environment in higher education has drastically changed. The requirements of students have drastically changed. The accountability that's being placed on higher education institutions has drastically changed. And so it's not the question of, can we just keep doing the same thing, getting the same results? If we keep doing the same thing, our results aren't going to be the same, and we're going to continue to suffer as an institution. And this is true of most higher education institutions. You know, Middle Georgia's felt some of that recently, 0.8% enrollment drop. We have to look at what we're doing and figure out what we're going to do that is new, that is different, that is unique, to try to place the institution in a different place so we can accept or receive different results. So how do we do that? Anytime you look at a strategic planning effort, you up a 3-year strategic plan, you're in your last year of that now. I've been very vested in the strategic planning process at the University of West Georgia for the last 13 and a half years that I've been there. Been a part of 3 different strategic planning processes, chaired the most recent academic affairs planning subcommittee within the strategic planning committee. And I'm also a strategy professor that teaches strategy and operations. So this is something I'm familiar with intimately and passionate about. If you look at any organization, whether it's an educational institution, whether it is a nonprofit organization or a for-profit business, you have to carefully define what their mission is. The mission answers the question, why do you exist? And that should be on all of your forefronts. You should have a clear statement as to why Middle Georgia State is here. Why does the state allocate millions of dollars each year for it to survive? And why do students keep coming? That's the reason. That's the mission. The vision. The vision has to do with where do we want to be and when do we want to be there? Those are 2 clear statements that every person at Middle Georgia State should have on the forefront of their mind. Separate from that, you've done a good job as an institution identifying what your values are that set the boundaries. And then we deal with strategy and operations. If you look at the levels of the institution, the mission and the vision really are the domain of the president and the board. That they are those who define what the vision and the mission are. The values is a collective agreement, everybody involved in what is most important to the institution. And then the strategy and trying to achieve some level of operational effectiveness largely is left to the provost and working with the vice presidents and the academic deans. That's the realm in which this position should fill within an organization if the organization is run well. So where are we at Middle State? Middle Georgia State has done a good job identifying its mission. It's spread throughout the document, you'll find out. And it's very clear and consistent with the mission statement that is outlined for state universities by the University System of Georgia. There's a lot of consistency there. That's established, it's in place. There's really not a reason now to revisit the mission statement. That is why this organization exists. The vision statement is also through a process of identifying what is the vision, where do we want to be, and it has to do with this issue of extraordinary higher learning. How can we continue to reinforce that? We'll talk more about that in a little bit. The values, we were down in Cochran, drove around campus. The values are pasted all up over flags around campus. They're all over here. It's a clear statement as to what is most important that every faculty member, every staff administrator, every student should set boundaries around the activities they participate in to make sure they're accomplishing the values as established by the institution. Now, strategy and operational effectiveness, as I mentioned, you're coming to the end of a strategic plan right now, and I've been at how consistent all the statements have been with all the groups I've met with last night and today. There's a clear sense that we need a clear strategy, the profession needs a clear strategy, particularly in the Division of Academic Affairs, and we need to look at operational effectiveness. So I want to talk through what those terms mean and how I'm defining them, and so you can have a clear idea of language we would use if we get the chance to work together. First, let's talk about strategy. I recognize that I'm going to use some terms that sometimes are business-oriented, but I don't really apologize for that. That's the environment that higher education is operating in now. And we have to be honest with ourselves and say, unless we can really work through that language and at least have a common shared experience, then if we can work through that and have that shared experience, we can talk a language that will help us make some progress. So we talk about 3 things when we relate to strategy. Who are the customers, who are the competitors, and what is the cost structure going to be? So how does that relate to Middle Georgia State? First, the customers, we have 2 groups of people we really need to please. A huge part of the budget comes directly from the state. we need to make sure we fill the mission that the state is allocating that money for, which is a regional state university that covers an 18-county region and fills the educational needs for that region. That's an important customer we meet. If we fail to do that, and if we look at the university system and just say, hey, that's a good idea, we're going to go do whatever we want and just keep that money flowing, guess what? The money won't flow. We'll get merged with somebody else and be gone, right? That has been a recent experience. We brush the state aside. We've got to fill that mission very carefully. The other mission, or the other customer, is to the students. We have got a student, as soon as they hear about Middle Georgia, is connected to the institution from the first time they step on campus. They have a seamless path through a graduation, and they stay connected to the institution until they're in a grave somewhere. That relationship is seamless, and it has to be a close relationship with academic affairs, student affairs, and alumni relations. We've got to make sure that if we're really treating our customer right, that experience is seamless across. And that requires us, honestly, if we're being totally honest, in academic affairs, to treat students often a little better, to be a little impatient, a little more kind sometimes, to make sure that we're setting up schedules that meet the needs of students, setting up academic programs that help students progress toward retention, progression, and graduation. That's something that we have got to be in academic affairs a serious partner in. So what about competitors? Well, competitors are an interesting thing. What about Georgia military and some of the competition that's happening there? Often state universities feel like they're competing with the technical college system because they can teach the mini core, those 27 transfer between technical college system and a state university system. But if we're really searching deeply, the competitors we really are ignorance, apathy, and poverty. As a state university, our job is to help the communities in which we teach, research, and serve to become better communities that have better people. How do we do that as a university? Well, ignorance, we've got to do a good job telling the story. We have a great university here with great academic programs, great student support services, and we need as many people to come through as possible. We've got to get that message out that they're not ignorant to us as an institution, Middle Georgia. They're also not ignorant to the value of higher education. Higher education is under a lot of scrutiny right now, and that will likely continue. We've got to do our part in stamping out that ignorance and helping the story of higher education be told. What about apathy? Apathy are those times when someone knows who you are, but really doesn't care, right? We can tell that story pretty well, that higher education matters, that we teach things like civility and civil conversation. We teach things that people can disagree and work through and talk through problems anyway. That's part of the apathy that we've got to get over, that higher education matters. Who participate in higher education, the better communities will be. What about poverty? Middle Georgia State is championed as being a low-cost alternative, which has ramifications for budgets, right, and lean operations. We can do a part to help poverty by staying, maybe not the lowest cost, but a low-cost alternative. Also tell the story that if you don't get a higher education, that includes associate degrees and those things, if you don't get a higher education, your lifelong earnings are drastically smaller than they otherwise would be. And you will not have the ability to provide for yourself and those you care for better than you otherwise could. So fighting against ignorance, apathy, and poverty is really the competition we're in. And if we perceive it like that, as an institution, we'll be more open to collaborative agreements with other institutions of higher education and won't see them as a competitor, but part of the solution. And if that mindset changes, we'll be really true to the vision we just talked about. And if we can implement a strategy and operation to implement that, those relationships will help that graduation rate and help the retention rates instead of focusing on us instead of them mentality. And then what about cost structures? As you know, e-tuition is going away. It will be back down to our base tuition level. That's $620,000 hole the budget has to fill in this institution at some point in the next 2 years. When you look at funding and allocation and impact, the cost structure of higher education really, and this institution probably is not going to change a lot. We'll still get some tuition revenue. We'll still get some money from the state. But the way that that is allocated, we have to do a good job if we're working on building our strategy at looking at the impact of those dollars. So it's not as if we allocate to X department and just assume that money is going to stay there forever. If we're serious about building strategy and building a future for Middle Georgia State, we have to ask, what are the impact of those dollars? Not just the new dollars that are allocated, but all dollars that are allocated, and try to find ways to get greater impact with fewer or the same dollars. So that's how we look at cost structure. And that's really what strategy is about. It's about being different in how we see competitors, how we see our cost structure, and how we see our customers. What about operational effectiveness? These are two areas, strategy and operational effectiveness, that often are mistaken for each other. If you look at operational effectiveness, what we're really asking the question is, how much output are we getting for the input that we're putting in? And how does that relate to Middle Georgia? We've identified the vision as higher learning, right? That's what we want to accomplish. That's what we want to pursue. Well, if you're feeling burned out, it's likely you're putting a lot of effort in and getting a little bit of a result. Meaning the impact you're having is not what you hoped that it would be. A mindset that focuses on operational effectiveness will continue to revisit what are we doing and what impact is it having, or how much higher learning is it creating. And if there are different ways that we can do things, different ways we can structure courses, different ways we can support colleges or departments, different ways we can fund activities, and have a greater impact if we have that mindset. So building a clear strategy on how we deal with those 3 C's, focusing on operational effectiveness in everything that we do, those 2 things will help build that coherent strategy that will support the vision and the mission. So some specifics about Middle Georgia State. Middle Georgia State has 5 campuses, as you well know. I argue with you on that, and I think you have 6. The 6th campus, you have 3,000 students that enroll online. From an accreditation standpoint, SAC-COC considers online learning a destination. So it's no different than taking a class in Cochrane. You're just taking the class online. And if you, in today's higher education market, if Middle Georgia State does not have an online strategy, you're going to waste a lot of resources, and your operational effectiveness is going to fall through the floor. You've got to ask, why are we going online? Which programs are going online? How much are we going online? And why are we doing it? And then you have to assess whether or not that's working and figure out if it's having the impact it should, and continue to revisit that process. And if you do that, you'll start to develop a core of Middle Georgia experiences that every student will have no matter where they are, online, Cochrane, Eastman, anywhere. And that set of experiences will help each student have a unique connection to Middle Georgia. And once we build that core, and that will include a seamless experience for every student, just like I mentioned earlier, from the time they start to the time they're in the grave. And so that all those entities, little administrative units within the institution, work together to provide that seamless experience. That core has to include, no matter where someone takes a class or pursues a degree program, they have equal levels of instruction, that we're not sending the worst faculty members out to one spot all the time because we can make them go. But everybody has equal access to quality instruction. It'll make sure that every degree program, they're not all going to be equally funded. If any provost candidate tells you that all the money's there, it's not. And just chalk them off the list because they're not being shared with you. Money is tight, and it's going to continue to be tight. That's why you've got to study operational effectiveness to figure out how we're going to make that Middle Georgia experience seamless for every degree program and every student. Once that's done and integrated, then we look at focus areas. So one thing that's been consistent as we've had meetings today is we've talked a lot about these 5 campuses and the challenge managing all the 5 campuses. And this question keeps coming up: how do you decide on whether you're going to allocate resources to Cochrane or to the IT department or institutional research? How are you going to make all those decisions? Well, resource allocation is simply an outcome of your strategy and priorities. If your stated strategy and your stated priorities don't match your resource allocation, you're really stating something that's not true. If you really want to understand what an institution values, you study the budget. That's where the money goes, and that's where the values are. And collectively, we need to be informed, transparent, and engaged in how the budget's developed to make sure that it matches a clear strategy, and we're getting as much higher learning for every dollar we spend and every amount of effort that's put forward by a member of the faculty or staff. So that's what we mean by integration focus. So if we get the chance to work together, which after a long day of interviews, meeting with a lot of people and hearing about everything that's happening at Middle Georgia, I am completely convinced that you've got an outstanding group of faculty and staff. That's been a consistent message by every group. You've got a lot of great people doing great things in different pockets across campus. You also have somewhere that you need someone to come in and help pull it all together, and a consistent, steady hand in the Office of Academic Affairs to make sure that academic affairs retains its place as the heart and soul of the institution, and that the funding models, that the student services, that everything we're doing in facilities and IT support that academic soul. That's the goal. If we have the chance to work together, that's what we'll work toward, making sure that academic soul is the heart of the institution, and everything else works collectively and collaboratively to make sure we're changing people's lives through inspired higher learning. So if we get together, get the chance to work together, we will build a strategy, we'll build an academic plan. Those will be some of the first few things we work on. Once those things are developed, we'll continue to look at the way we allocate current resources and future resources to make sure we support them. So that gives you an overview of who I am, my approach, some of the experiences that I've had, and I think now it's time for questions. Thank you, Doctor.
It's your turn now. Anybody got a question?
We've got a little bit of time, so don't waste
it. If you don't ask him a question, he's going to start asking you questions. Maybe that's what. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Shamani, and I'm in the School of Education. You made reference to 5+1 that we have with the online one. And of course, you are aware that we went through consolidation a few years ago. And if you become the successful candidate, how do you help us create academic culture for each campuses within the larger institution of MGA?
Langston, no, I don't know what.
You're good. You're good.
So there are parts of that question that continue to come up. I think before you say what is unique about Kaufman or what is unique about the Warner Robins campus, what is the academic culture, we have to collectively decide what is Liverpool. What is that Liverpool culture? What connects across academic affairs, across departments, so there's a seamless experience. My hope is that circle is so small. But once we agree to those principles and practices, everybody's on board. If those principles and practices are too expansive, we're missing an opportunity to allow Robins to create themselves. That makes sense. So first, share experiences, everybody will be part of. So once we get that, figure out what the shared experiences are that every student will have, every faculty member will have, and then we allow the groups to come up with what that academic culture is. And if we do it any other way, there won't be a Middle Georgia. It'll just be 5 separate campuses that all function independently. We've got to build that shared experience first, and then figure out what we're going to do in each one of the campuses. A large part of that will be careful and systematic academic planning. In talking to those who are in the office of the provost right now, we don't really, on Macon campus, we have the ability, or Middle Georgia has the ability that if a student steps on campus and wants to major in something, we can give them a program sheet, so a class schedule, that'll keep them on track to graduate in 4 years. We don't yet have those developed for the offsite campuses. And what that means is we need to make some decisions about which programs will be offered where and what resources we have to do that. And the to West Georgia, or to Middle Georgia, is to have someone who can't make a decision. Because if you don't make those decisions, even though some of them are not comfortable, 2, 3, 4 years from now, you're going to be sitting in the same place, wondering, what are we doing? Why are we offering programs here? What are we offering there? But once you have that plan, you know who's going to be which programs will be offered where. Once you have that in place, you can start to build a culture around the programs. And it needs to be innovative. It can be cohort-based. There's been a lot of off-campus success with that. It can be a structured cycle of programs. It can be some integration of teaching faculty across. But building that academic culture is Middle Georgia, and then a focus in each of the areas is the process we go through. Does that help? Thank you.
Dr. Anderson, I met earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about your thinking about P&T processes for a recently consolidated institution to your institution, joining a relatively new 4-year institution, and how you would emphasize the development of faculty in those processes?
Sure. There's a very challenging thing when you have an merged institution like the one we've got here. There are 3 parts that need to be considered, obviously, teaching and service. Those are the 2 that are fairly straightforward. Teaching should be primary at an institution like this, and not just teaching evaluations, but in my view, it would have to come up through the faculty and see if that view is shared. Things like, how are we improving the success of students in the classroom is not just did the student enjoy it and did they fill out the evaluation, but what are we doing to increase retention, progression, graduation? That's got to be a part of the teaching piece. We've got to figure out how that would happen and how we integrate it. And part of the, I've had a recent experience with that. We looked at West Georgia, one course. There were 4 faculty that taught the course. 3 of them had very high pass rates. The other one had a 30% fail rate. And this has been a 30% 10 years or longer. There's clearly something that those 3 faculty members are doing that 4th faculty member is not. And so part of that conversation in terms of promotion and tenure should be, is the faculty member willing to engage in ways that are going to be innovative and instructive and succeed? So that's the teaching piece. The service piece, at a state university, the mission is community engagement and outreach. So it's not just how many committees you served on, but it would be my view, and I would argue for this, that we need to have some engagement in the community, and that needs to count as part of this element. Now, research at a state university or kind of one with a low entry, kind of an entrance or access institution, which is the mixed model that's here, research is a very tricky one. Because if you're looking for one broad stroke definition of research that fits every department, every division, across all of campuses, we're not going to find it. We'll spend the next 20 years debating it. But it should at least be flexible enough to include traditional research, which those with the graduate degrees are prepared and are trained to do, although it can't exclusively do it because an institution like Middle Georgia doesn't have the resources to fund it the way that we need to. And you can't hold somebody accountable for something you don't give the money to do, right? If someone's having to pay themselves to go to a conference so they can get promoted and tenured, that's the institution's fault. Those requirements need to match. They have to match the funding mechanism is, right? So research is one option in that second category. Another one is scholarship generally defined. And that can be within a community. It can be publication of artworks, all those things. Another category is creative activity. On campus today, they're doing some very innovative things in terms of airplane design and drone design. Should that be included as research in the promotion and tenure criteria? I absolutely think it should. We need to have that broad definition and not be so limited that only peer-reviewed journals count. And so I think that broad discussion has to happen, but I want a student to be able to walk on campus and get a 4-year degree plan to get out of here We also want a new faculty member to come in and know what the requirements are from day one. Honestly, promotion and tenure, changing those requirements can be a 5, 6, 7-year process. But getting that going, getting the discussion broad is what I would encourage. Does that help? Sure. Other questions? All right, I want to know I keep hearing this statement that we want a leader to come in for affairs. When you say leader, what do you mean? Leader can mean a lot of different things. So tell me what you mean by that. Don't waste time. We don't have very much time. Anybody jump in, please.
There are so many good ideas and so many good people in the academic side of things.
Good. Thank you very much. That's very clear. Anyone else? Go ahead. Well said.
And so I think what many of us are doing, yes, in those backgrounds are wonderful benefits and are challenging. But then someone that is ready to stop reflecting and get from what Nancy's just said. And I appreciate the comment that sometimes those decisions aren't easy, but one that is well defined and clear and followed through is something that I think is important.
Very good description. Thank you. The provost is often described as some managing partner among equals, the vice presidents. And unless the Division of Academic Affairs is managed in a way that they can come toe-to-toe and be as organized and as transparent, as collaborative, and as engaged as any of the other divisions, Academic Affairs isn't really pulling its weight. And that's a difficult thing to do, but if we don't do it, students are hurt. If we look back to the reasons we're here to help students. And so it's important for Academic Affairs always to keep its house in order. Not that it'll be perfect, but we'll come as an equal partner to the table. I think that's an important piece morally for us to do. Other questions you've got? Go ahead. They want to get you a mic. Hang on one second.
But they can't hear you.
What would be your goals for the first 6 months you were here and the first year?
Very
Just
good.
a brief description of what
Sure.
they would be.
Those have been honed a lot in the last 24 hours. I've had a chance to meet with a lot of different groups. The first thing clearly is to figure out what the strategy is. And that's a detailed conversation we need to engage in from day one. Figuring out what the organizational strategy is and build a strategic plan that outlines going to be different than we currently are. If you look at a lot of strategic plans for universities, they're very vanilla. You could take the name off and hand it to another institution and nothing would change. We have to clear, Middle Georgia honestly is at a financial position that we have to clearly define who we are, and equally important is who we're not. Where we're going to offer programs, and equally important where we're not. So as far as defining that strategy, that'd be the first thing we'd work at together. And making sure The second thing we'd work at very clearly is that operational effectiveness issue. Do we have the systems in place that we assess what we're currently doing, cancel some things, and do some new things? If those systems aren't in place, and I don't know enough because I haven't been here long enough, but to implement that process. So the strategy process, the process of continuous improvement, or operational effectiveness, those would be the work on. As an element of that, we would work on an academic plan, and this would be in the first probably 2 or 3 months. We'd outline for each campus which programs we're going to offer, when we're going to offer them in a scheduled structure. And so when students enter or start looking next fall, an advisor or recruiter can hand them that packet and say, okay, if you go to Cochrane, here are the X number of programs we offer, here's your structure, and from day one, here's your schedule next 4 years. Getting those in place is critical for the future of the institution. So those would be the first 3 things that we'd really work on. And then the budget cycle, I'm guessing you're probably in budget development right now, fiscal year. Has that started yet? And so much of that budget development for this fiscal year will be built while those strategies and operational effectiveness are working on. Certainly within the Division of Academic Affairs, and hopefully within all divisions, we would make sure that we're evaluating where the current money is spent and see if there are more efficient ways to do that. But certainly by next budget cycle, the budget should be tied to assessment. And if we can provide evidence that certain things are working, wherever those are across the university, that the new money and current money is reallocated to those areas that are being mostly positively affecting students. So 6 months from now, we'd work on strategic plan, academic plan, making sure we're working on this operational effectiveness idea. A year from now, we'd make sure the budget follows those same principles. That's what I would work for collaboratively with everybody involved. Does that help a little bit? Good. Other questions you've got or things you want to talk about? I know I'm the last candidate, but come on, you got to help me.
This is a mighty quiet group. This is your opportunity.
Lay it all out there. Go ahead.
We got.
Mike's going.
I think given the amount of change that this institution has been through, one of the things that is important in whoever our next provost is that that individual be a good fit. Can you speak a little about why this opportunity is interesting to you as an individual and why you would want to come here?
I think you're exactly right. It needs to be a good fit. I would be a long fit. So I will say I'm vested in the teacher's retirement system, so I'll be somewhere in the system for at least a certain number of years into the future. Why this opportunity right now? I think Middle Georgia is the best opportunity in the state of Georgia. I'm not saying that facetiously or trying to lift you up. I've worked at an institution for the last 14 years. It's a great institution, but change at an institution that's been minced and has a lot of institutional pressure is very, very difficult. It takes a long time. To be a part of something that's going to build a lot of systems from scratch is thrilling. That's where I like to operate. Provost candidates come in a lot of different varieties. Some like to share ideas and talk about philosophies and kind of live in that realm. I enjoy that, but I'm much more toward the action side. I like to see results. As I mentioned to a group earlier, I've probably only got about 50 years left to live. I want to make as big an impact as I can in those 50 years. And so I don't want to sit around talking about things for a long time. We'll talk enough to make sure everybody has the idea, has the opportunity to share, that the right ideas build up, and then we're going to move forward and we're going to be rational as we do it. So that's what's exciting for me about the opportunity now.
You might want to share with sociology background because not many business profs have sociology backgrounds.
Let's talk about that for
you
just a
might
minute.
need to mention that. That might be good.
This is part of why I think it's a good fit. My academic training, I started at a junior college that was similar to Middle Georgia State used to be. It was Middle Georgia College. And played junior college football, so I understand the plight of the student athlete. But I transitioned through a number of majors as an undergraduate student, spent some time in psychology, spent some time in English, and ended up getting an undergraduate degree in sociology because I love to study how the human group operates. And so, although I come from a college of business, I'm really a closet sociologist. I went on to get, that's right, I went on to get a master's in education, where I really had the chance to study how groups work in education and study how sociology works in education. I really wanted to end up as an academic administrator. Looking at graduate school programs, I met with several programs that had degrees in higher education administration, about the theories that they use to help solve institutional problems. And they have a lot of value coming from the educational viewpoint, but education also creates problems. And there are a lot of institutional inertia, and I had been studying that for a long time as a master's student. So I looked at a lot of different programs and found one that focused on three areas: strategic management, organizational behavior, and organizational theory. And my focus was to try to learn as much as we could about how organizations operate, and at some point have the opportunity to work on one, not just in one. And so I went to the University of Kentucky, got a PhD in business administration, and studied all three of those areas. My dissertation focused on why people comply with organizational policy. And I studied in a university setting. There was a committee that was revamping the performance appraisal system for 10,000 employees of the University of Kentucky system. I had the chance to be the research assistant, and my dissertation chair chaired the committee. And we collected data on 1,200 manager-employee pairs to figure out when a manager asks someone to do something, whether or not they would actually comply and why. And I could talk for a long time about what we learned from that. The shorter answer is we really don't know why. So all of my research, although I come from a business school, has been a lot of it's been in the educational setting and in higher education. And the theories that I study do come straight out of liberal arts and sociology. And the field of strategy, actually, it's fascinating. It didn't really develop until the early 80s. So it's a real field. It didn't have any theoretical background to rely on. So a lot of the theories come from sociology and some from economics. And so pulling those two together has given me a unique perspective to help lead parts of an institution. So that's some of the background that leads to how I'm here today. Does that help? Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Eric Sun. I'm the Associate Dean of College of Arts and Sciences.
Very good.
I'd like to hear a little bit about your decision-making process. And what is behind that is that, as Nancy said, there are a lot of good ideas. You've got talented people. Mm-hmm. And as these good ideas bubble up, often the one that has or is championing an idea, it doesn't get that idea pushed forward, might feel like a loser. How do you between winners and losers in deciding on a direction to move on to?
Certainly. When dealing with decision making, I think one thing that we have to admit up front is we have to do it. Someone at some point has to make a decision, right? You can't just wander and promise everything to everyone, or else everyone will be frustrated and students will be hurt. So the decision process is a pretty simple one. Before we talk about the ideas that bubble up, we need to talk about the end goal. What is the strategy we're looking at? What are the goals we're trying to accomplish? For instance, if it is to move a four-year graduation rate from 9.8 to, say, 25, and 1 out of 4 students graduate in 4 years, that seems reasonable. 1 out of 4 finish in 4 years. That seems a reasonable goal. If that's the goal, we then start to say, how can we do it? That's when all the ideas come to agreement with the goal first. And those ideas, you sift through based on data, assumptions are built into those data, and a gut check makes common sense to decide which ones to pursue. And then you transparently make a decision. Pursue these 3, these 5, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. And then you have to go through the process of asking yourself, did it work? And if it didn't, you've got to have the courage to backtrack and say, we're not going to continue with that. I'm a huge fan of pilot projects. Let's try something initially to see if it works and makes a difference. If it does, let's expand it. Let's not jump into something we don't yet understand or haven't tried. And so decision-making is not about being faced with 10 different alternatives and picking one. It's about first identifying what the goal is, and then slowly sifting through possibilities that'll help lead us there, and settling in and building on those paths that are the most effective. Does that help? Go ahead.
Hi, you talked about, oh, by the way, I'm Yoon Suk Chae, who teaches Spanish here.
Very good.
You talked about the online campus as a campus. I think that's very interesting. Now, though, online courses by nature have their inherent limitations compared to the traditional setting, right? Especially in foreign language classes, we, as the instructors, face tremendous challenges. I mean, I have never taught any online class, but I have taught a video conference class. And I felt really limited, and I couldn't really do many of the activities that I usually do with my students in class. So, but then at the same time, the enrollment in these online classes has really skyrocketed. So, I mean, how would you reconcile? I mean, instead of just like, shooting for higher and higher enrollment, since we need the money as well, but at the same time, we have this ethical obligation that we need to prepare our students for the next level, that they know what has been presented in class before they get to the next level.
Sure. Very good question. I'm going to politely disagree with some of your assumptions in my answer, if that's okay. Your assumption was that online has limits that face-to-face. I agree with that statement. I would also agree with the statement that's opposite that face-to-face has limitations that online doesn't. If we look at both of those statements together, I think that paints a pretty clear picture. Let me give you an example. I teach in operations management, highly quantitative. We go through 20 or 25 formulas over a 16-week period. I found for a long time teaching that class that I had a third of the students who were bored to death, too slow. A third who got it, I was going the right speed, and a third who had no clue what was going on, right? So what I did is put a lot of the content in terms of the lecture content online. So the students then could self-pace. They could, if they understood something, watch that 17 times in a row without having to slow down the other 35 students in the class. So in that environment, the online environment actually provides a better medium for instruction than the face-to-face environment. And it's actually much more efficient, because if a student understands it the first time, they don't have to revisit it. They don't have to sit and listen to lots of people who don't get it ask questions. So if the assumption is that they're equal but different approaches to instruction, then as a faculty member, we've got to really revisit how we teach and see if there is an equal way we can teach in the online and a different but equal way we could teach in the face-to-face environment. That decision should be made again on assessment. What are the students saying about it, and what are they learning? What you just described to me is that they're saying a lot about the experience of having access at a time that they choose to be online or in a location they online. That's why online enrollments may be going way up. That's something, if we're in tune to our customers, we need to be concerned with. If you treat online as either online or face-to-face, I think it's really not capturing the full picture. I think those programs and courses are probably most successful that have a hybrid model, that maybe they have some online content that they then meet every other week, once a week, every 3 weeks, something face-to-face, and are able to have some interaction. And so I think online is a great tool. Face-to-face is also a great tool. What we have to do is use every tool we have to create the best student learning possible.
Is that it's not applicable uniformly
Sure, I would agree with that.
Especially for foreign languages, really. So your example of operational something, that doesn't convince me all the way. I'm sorry.
Sure. I'm not trying to convince you. What I want to say, and I would agree with your last statement, there are conferences that aren't as flexible to an online delivery. And the decision as to how flexible that content is should be made by the group of faculty members. So the faculty members should decide collectively what goes online and which don't. Does that help a little bit? I'm not saying you have to agree. Sure, that's fine. Other questions you've got? Go ahead.
Paul Johnson, the coordinator of the Student Success Center. Could you tell us about graduation rates at West Georgia, how they've changed over the years, or any success stories, or anything with retention rates as well?
Sure. So graduation rates at West Georgia, when I was in the provost's office, wasn't within my domain. There was another associate vice president named Dr. Gantner, and she's the one that led the RPG committee and worked on all those initiatives. I don't think West Georgia has the golden bullet yet. I think they've tried a lot of different things. They're trying right now to really focus, like a lot of institutions in the university system, to focus on those gateway courses, to try to figure out how we could change instruction in certain DFW rates classes. In the School of Business, Operations Management was one of them. It had a 30% fail rate for years, and it's the one that kept a lot of people out from graduating. We've made some difference by putting a lot of those things online and coming up with a hybrid model. That's really helped in that situation. I'm not saying it's the same in every situation. This example earlier, so if you're in the meeting, I apologize, but one other role that I have is I chair the Carroll County School System Board of Education. And over the last 6 or 7 years, we've increased graduation rate from a 67% to 85%. And without going into too many details, every group on campus, or every group that's part of the school system, whether it's a grant funding education, a grant funding entity, or the human resource division, or the teaching and learning, they all want to take credit for it, right? You'll hear a presentation and say the graduation went up because of whatever they're doing fills in the gap. And the reality is it's a combination of everything. And we have to, the assessment system is so important. If we try a lot of things, put a lot of resources somewhere, and retention progression don't increase, we need to reallocate the resource and try something different and have the courage to admit it and move on. Does that help a little bit? Good.
Okay, John, so you're a candidate within the University System of Georgia,
Yes.
so that you have some USG knowledge and background. I'd like to understand your philosophy about working. You're going to be our representative to the university system on academic matters, and also within peers, your USG peers. Can you talk a little bit about how you see us working with the system and with our other peers within the system?
Sure. So the structure of how institutions work with each other is fairly well developed. For about 5 years, I served as a member of a committee called RACEA, which is Regents Administrative Committee on Effectiveness and Accreditation. And I found that to be a fascinating and helpful group. Group would get together, all addressing similar problems, help solve it. And so the university system has really been insightful in setting those committees up. We also have RACA, which is for the academic affairs, and that's the part that I would be, or one that I would be a part of. So I think collaborating within the structure is really, really important. I also think it's really important to get people to talk to each other outside the system. If you look at the state university sector, all of us have similar RP graduation rates with the exception of 2 entities, University of North Georgia and Georgia College and State University. So I think it's perfectly reasonable and really beneficial, even though their missions are somewhat different, to have groups of administration, groups of faculty, and groups of staff meet with them and find out what they're doing that we're not, or what we're doing that they're not, so we can stop doing those things. And those types of collaborations are really pretty critical. And I think that's the best collaboration we have is between institutions. of similar size typically. Does that help? Good. Other questions you've got? Listen, y'all are making this way too easy. Go ahead. Don't apologize. No one else is jumping up.
Well, you mentioned Georgia College, which is sometimes called Gwinnett County's 13th. I mean, so it's a lot of students that come from a very affluent part of Atlanta. We have students that come from one of the most underperforming public school systems in the state. So they're very, very different socioeconomic levels, different levels of educational preparedness. So our student body is, you know, anecdotally from the faculty, we know that a lot of the reasons why we have poor RPG rates has to do with what's happening inside these walls. It's what's happening out there. You know, they're trying to take care of their children and their parents and their grandparents and their car breaks. And so there's a lot of different factors that we have. So as you consider a student body that has significant draws on their time and their lives, and you think about RPG rates in terms of that, you know, what are some strategies that you would recommend to serve that type of a student body?
I think you described the problem very well, and it's not that different than what we deal with at West Georgia. It's not uncommon at all to have a student come in who's taking 15 or 18 hours and working 40 hours a week. You listen to that story and you wonder, how in the world are you doing this, right? How is it really going to be successful? And the challenge we have is it's very difficult to ask a faculty member to teach the class and to be a parent, right? Or a grandparent or whoever the caregiver is. I think in an institution like Middle Georgia, support and student services area is critically important. And it has to work seamlessly with academic affairs. So if a faculty member sees somebody struggling with X, Y, and Z, and maybe an out-of-class issue, they've got to have someone they can go to, whether it's an academic advisor that can walk them through and really be the parent in their life that a lot of kids don't have. And so I think that's a piece of it, making sure that that process is seamless to help with the students. Now, that's very difficult. It's easy to say, it's very difficult to do in a budget-constrained environment. But collectively, we'll have to try some unique things. I think separate from that, we've got to ask ourselves honestly, in Bibb and Houston counties and some of the other counties around, we have students that are coming out of high schools that are underprepared. Certainly part of that is the family environment they come from. Certainly it's poverty, certainly it's ignorance, certainly it's apathy. But at the same time, there's a good chance a lot of those teachers came out of Middle Georgia at one point, right? So we have got to be open to the umbrella that we can help them solve the problem, not point a finger at K-12. And that's where that P&T issue is about community service. We've got to open we have, and this is just being honest, the people in this institution of any institution across Middle and Central Georgia. I don't think there's anyone that can argue that. What we have to do is provide paths to get that intellect out into help solving community problems. And by doing that, we'll help the next generations be a little better when they come out. And so I think it's at least a twofold solution, getting us involved there and helping the students that are here with some social support. Does that help a little bit? And it's not easy. It is very, very difficult.
I'm Randy Spade. I'm in the School of Education as well. There several of us have long 12, so we know exactly what you're speaking about when you talk about school boards. But when you try to encourage us to become more involved in the community, School of Ed folks already do. Sure. But as you're herding cats with a diverse, with the rural section, the urban section, et cetera, will you incentivize, or being a sociologist, how will you address the dynamics of getting us to work harder and feel like we're part of a team and increase staff morale?
Right. The short answer is very carefully. the honest answer is resources are pretty finite. And often when we want to incentivize something, what that means is we have to pull a resource from somewhere else. I'm certainly open to doing that. I think the best solutions to problems come from the people that know the problem most intimately. And so if we're working with college faculty, which at large do a great job engaging with K-12, working with school boards, working with teachers, working at those things, those faculty members who are engaged both with teaching, the structure of the college, are going to know the best solutions that should happen. I believe fundamentally that most strategy we talk about in academic affairs happens at the level of the dean. Deans having the stewardship and the accountability to lead their group of faculty to solutions within their areas of content. That's where we'll put the biggest dent in the problems that we're having. If that's all directed by the provost in a little bit of a micromanaged way, deans aren't going to feel accountable. They're not going to be able to lead their faculty. They're not going to have control over the research and be able to reallocate those within their colleges. And we're not going to have the impact that we could. And so it's very, very difficult. The strategy is best built at the dean level. And deans need to be supported by provosts that'll help them do that. They need to be open, collaborative, engaging with the faculty, and open to new ideas and new ways of doing things. But I won't promise you, because I know it doesn't exist, that more money is coming from somewhere. But if a dean came and said, we'd like to shift these resources here and there and try this to incentivize that, let's do it. Let's try something. If the faculty are behind it and they think we need to try a new structure, let's do it. But if the faculty aren't behind it and I want to do it, we're not doing it. We're going to work through the process together because the solutions come from the people who know the problems most intimately. Does that help a little bit? Good. Other questions? Have I worn you out enough already?
Got one more.
Lee Simmons, Media Culture and the Arts.
Very good.
You've spoken to creating a culture across all of our campuses and online, but what role do you see playing in creating that culture and creating pathways for students into the education of the arts? You know, you bring it into music, fine arts, and then how that then explores back into English and always into business. What role do you see the arts playing in our culture?
So as we build students should leave a baccalaureate degree with a different perspective they had when they came in. Certainly a lot of that happens during their junior and senior year when they learn specific things to a specific major, whether that's English, history, business, whatever it is. The real gem of a liberal education happens during the first 2 years. The arts, music, reading, English, history, all of those need to be embedded deeply throughout that core curriculum. I think an organization or university that is short-sighted packs core curriculum classes with tons and tons of students and just gets them through. A student should be transformed in the first 2 years. Teaching fine arts, teaching music, teaching humanities, teaching sociology, psychology. That's the way we teach people to learn. Learning is, and how learning can be developed, how we can think of criticism, and how we can think of collaboration. All of that is an inherent part of what we do. And if the first 2 years is not working well, just like a K-12 student that comes in a freshman unprepared, if the core curriculum hasn't done what it needed to, we then have a junior and senior year where we have to teach people how to think critically. And that should already be developed. And so I led an effort at West Georgia to the core curriculum outcomes and do some structuring in terms of assessment and pathways through the core curriculum, including the core overlays that the board requires. And all of that is significant work because that's the bulk of what an institution offers to a baccalaureate student, is to get through, work their way through that and come out a changed person. And I think the fine arts and music and English, humanities, all, as well as the sciences, play a critical role in helping that transition happen. Does that help? Good question. Thank you. Anything else?
I guess I'll ask the last question too. I'll
Right.
be the one last question, and then it'll be over. You have met with many different groups today. You've had a long day. What is your one key takeaway from your visit to our institution?
It has been an insightful day for sure. I do want to thank Dr. Sullivan and the committee who have set up a great interview process that really has given me a clear window into the institution. And we're turning back to where we started this discussion. The one takeaway is this: you have really, really good, capable, bright, and engaged people. A lot of institutions can't say that. And that makes 90% of the effort there. I think you also have a very good understanding of where you are as an institution. There seems to be some unity. You've got good people, good ideas, you just need things pulled together. And I articulate what was mentioned earlier. We talked about what leadership really means. You really need that provost office to step in and be a collaborator and a decision maker to help the institution move from where it is to where it should be operating. And that's the takeaway that I left today. And I also take this away. I do think this is one of the greatest opportunities in the state of Georgia right now, for sure. And if you look back 5 or 10 years from now about this search process, whether it's me, whether it's some other candidate, I hope the middle of Georgia gets the, because if you do, the next 5 to 10 years are incredibly bright. And this is high stakes. If you don't, you're also going to really, really struggle. Because with an institution with finite resources like this, has to be managed well. There's no room for error or waste. And honestly, if we do that well together, there are going to be lives that are different because Middle Georgia became the institution it has the potential to be. So that's what I take away from it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Thank everybody for coming.